When we did this outreach, we actually covered two subject areas. One was, what do we expect Wareham Village to look like? What's the citizens' opinion of what needs to happen, if it needs to happen, et cetera. And the second part was, how do you want to be communicated with? Today, we're talking strictly about the Wareham Village section. The communication section will be addressed in a separate presentation. So Ken, if we go just to the next slide. So basically, what we're talking about is points 1 and 2. So gather citizen input and consensus regarding what a revitalization would look like, what they expect the village to look like, and to present potential options to them. The third bullet, actually, when we designed this project initially, the thought was talk about Wareham Village and communication, and then use the communication model to reach out for further communication regarding what's happening with Wareham Village. And to an extent, we can do that now, but what we found as we went on is we got a lot more information if we allowed the people we were speaking with to choose which piece they wanted to talk about first. So some of them talked about Wareham Village, some of them talked about communication, and the bottom line is we've got all the communication information now, but we haven't built the model yet. So we're addressing 1 and 2 today. Okay, next, please. And just to refresh it, for those of you who know and those that don't know, we took a approach to this that we wanted to understand what people from inside the town government thought, so employees, heads of committees, consultants who were working with the town, and then we wanted to understand from the outside in, so what does the average citizen want and expect? How does it look for them? So if we can go next, please. So we conducted 60 interviews, and those interviews ran anywhere from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours in length, which is probably reasonable since we were conducting really 2 separate research projects in one visitation. One about communication, one about Wareham Village. We looked at making sure we had representatives from young voters, onset residents, families, neighborhood residents, all the various different groups within the town. And if you looked at the sample base, so from the inside out, 17% of the people we talked to were members of the planning board, the WRA, or the select board. Another 10% were heads of committees. And then the remaining 73% were citizens at large. Some of them were in committees, belonged to committees or groups, some did not. And we ran into, there were 2 major challenges with this project. And we'll look, when we talk at communication, how the town might be able to address some of them. But the first challenge was, in order for me to talk with people, somebody had to get their approval to give me their contact information. So we went a long time. So let's just say I wanted to talk to Jim. I would need to find out who knew him, have that person, in this case it was Richard Swenson, reach out, see if he would be willing to talk to me, and then we had to physically be able to connect to set up a meeting time. And so that process for that one interview could be 5 to 7 weeks long, depending on, I mean, how do you ask someone to make a priority to reach out and ask this person if they can talk to me? And then how do you ask that person to make a priority to talk to me when they don't even know who I am? So that was, and so that's really part 1 and 2 of the challenge, is first being able to get the contact information, second being able to set up the time to do that. Now, what I will say is when we went through that timing, the people I talked to, I have not met better people. Everyone was participative, everybody had great ideas, etc. So going forward, one of the things the town needs to look at is if it's going to want more and more input from the citizens directly, how do we make it an easier project? Next slide, please. And so we're going to start to talk now. The next set of slides the rest of them are really about the information we gathered. And You're going to see information presented in a couple of different ways. So each slide will have a bullet on it that says what percentage of the citizens we talked to brought up that subject matter. The second data will be how many comments were made within a certain category. And so you could have one person make 3 comments that basically were all saying the same thing, and it would count for 1 comment. Or you could have a person say, let's say talking about Merchant's Way, making a comment about the water, and then making a comment about safety, and those are 2 totally separate comments. So they will be included in different areas. So in your bullet, you'll never have more than the actual percentage of people interviewed. But in the comment space, there may be more comments than there were actual number of people who talked, because somebody may have made 2 or 3 or 4 comments that were very diverse and applied. So when we looked at the data broke out into these major categories: the discussion on development, what the images that is expected the village to portray, what should buildings look like, what should their style be, how tall should they be, et cetera, what kind of businesses or retail is wanted, marketing for the village, and events. So we'll touch on each one of those. These next several spaces: green space, safety and security, traffic, parking, benches, and maybe water. Those are areas, when I first started talking to people, they would be talking about those things specifically about Merchant's Way. And pretty soon, everyone was saying, these actually apply across the whole village. So, and then lastly, we'll hit water and Merchant's Way, and those are comments specifically to those areas, and they're put last not because they're least important, but because everything that's said before actually applies to them. So we're going to start with development and planning. 38% of participants mentioned development and planning. So for this part of the project, even though we interviewed 60 people, only 55 of them have comments here. So for example, one person was fairly new in the community and didn't feel comfortable making comments about Wareham Village, didn't feel they knew enough. In another situation, a second interviewee walked in and finished the interview when we originally started with one, and during that phase, they happened to end up in the communication space, not Wareham Village. So in this space, we are talking about what do we expect the design to look like? What do we expect from development? And what I've done here is put out together in what the words were that were being said. So if I put a pie chart out that said, oh, these 16 points about development, who would actually understand what they meant? So as we go down these slides, as we go down each one of them, you'll see a comment in red, and that means that that was the comment that was made more than anybody else in this section. And then you'll see a comment in blue, and that'll be the second. And so for this particular area, development of, how do you work with development in Wareham Village? You saw 4 mentions of established design templates being very important. Then you also saw comments like, no developers should be involved. We had other comments where it said, leave the design and development wide open. Developers know what they're doing. So we're dealing with those types of inputs, and they run the gamut. Now, you're going to see fewer mentions in this area because we asked people to talk open-ended about what they were considering. We weren't trying to push them into thinking in one space or another. We wanted their open flow. And there were 16 people. There were actually, if you look, there were probably about 10 people who actually were concerned with the development phase of this. What that tells me is, one, we need to listen to them, but two, we need to educate the citizen population on what developers do, what development is, how it's going to be approached by, for Wareham Village, et cetera. And when you look in this space, these yellow arrows point to, I think, two important pieces is develop a template for the layout of the town. What can we expect to be in it? So proactively look at the planning. And the second one, it says it's actually must be proactive, included in design, include us in basically in design in order to attract interest, residents and businesses. And again, in this type of research, when you get a volume number, it says, okay, the majority of people think about this. It's probably a mature subject, much more mature or common subject area. But you're going to get some of your best ideas from the one or two comments that show up. So think one or two comments, possibly more strategic thinking people. Wasn't up to us to address how that should play out. So Ken, next slide, please. So this is still part of development and planning, and there were 15 comments on we need planning to happen. And you'll see the first three in red, they all play off each other. Need a village plan, want to understand where the village is going, implement a redesign committee, and also there should be a mediator for the design committee. So that set of comments really group into one category under planning. And then down the bottom, you have three blue categories that I think are interesting. And they talk about what else is impacting what happens in Wareham Village. So Toby Hospital overpowers the village. The word was used multiple times, overpowers or overruns. It's difficult. We must, as Wareham Village, be able to upgrade so we can stand on our own. The dam is a consideration. Is that part of Wareham Village? If it is, fix it. So the citizens want to know, is that part of the village? And the other thing is our High Street and Chapel Streets part of the village? So we were looking for, there were people looking for further clarification on what Wareham Village really consists of. And the other thing I would say, if anyone has questions as we go along, feel free to ask them. I'll answer them if I can, or I'll say we're going to cover it later, just hold on, or I'll say let me see if I can get an answer. I don't know. So on this next slide, with regard to developing and planning, we did have 5 people who were really probably more business experience, maybe not, or just very driven to understand you have to promote and encourage people to do things, and they were comments about incentives or investments into Wareham Village. You know, how do you get small business investment to get small business back? How do you incent in order to get investment? How do you incent for flex and incubator business space? And how do you call on capitalization for builders? How do you help them get that? And then also using CDBG for grants, et cetera. So you have a group thinking about how you fund this. And then you had 4 comments regarding marketing, regarding the development. We're going to talk about marketing the village later, but this has to do with marketing to encourage development. And one is leveraging Wareham Land Trust and other organizations and entities that can help the change happen. And the second is whatever help Serpide can provide for marketing. So there is a place where Serpide was mentioned, what kind of information could they give us or help in terms of physical development, and then there was a second mention on how to use it or leverage it for marketing, for development.
Tricia, I have a question. Did you challenge any of the statements that were being made, or did you just list them down?
I mostly just listed them down.
Okay.
Second question, Trish.
Uh-huh.
Were the respondents from in the inclusive group of inside and out, or one or the other?
It's inclusive.
Okay.
And so, and I think, Annie, I have a breakdown on one of the handouts, one of the notes pages that tells how that exactly breaks out. We can look at that later. So we move on. So that's, in a nutshell, what was said about developers and the development in general. But there was a lot about image. And so we asked open-ended, what do you expect the image to be? What do you want Wareham Village to look like? Nothing was put out to prompt any answers. We had 18 mentions, so 37 comments total. 73% of participants gave insight into this. So biggest number, 18 Cape Cod look mentions, New England style, 10 mentions. And it goes on down to, there were the environmental town leverage our assets. There were 4 mentions in that area, and the other were 2 or 3 or 1. And so, you start to look at what does that really mean. And first of all, Ken, the next slide. And this is going to fly in, so go, if you can just hit it. So the input, we did ask, do you have an idea or an example of what you're talking about? So, and there'll be one more, Ken. So the first group is local mentions, and so these had the most mentions, Plymouth, Falmouth, and Marion's Main Street, which can be expected because you're talking to people and their reference point is often their surrounding neighborhood. The second group mentioned for the redeveloped area, so you have Franklin, New Hampshire, Bath, Maine, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Portsmouth, Massachusetts, and the Boston waterfront. And I think there's an arrow that flies into this. We can use it or not use it. I guess we have to get through it. To me, this was the more important group of input because they were speaking specifically about towns that had developed small parts of their town recently and brought it to a whole new image and function. And so if I were looking at running this project further, I would want to understand those in more detail. And then there's also in that list, Salem was also mentioned. It's not up there because the comment about Salem was, but they only looked at renovating or replacing large buildings. They didn't look at smaller buildings. So, but if large buildings is what we're looking at, then Salem would go in that list as well. And then the other cities that were mentioned were all beautiful cities. Katuitt, Chatham, Mashpee, Rockport, Newburyport, the old New Bedford, the brick building and the brick work there was mentioned several times. So just to help clarify more even what these people were thinking. And then we looked at another way to look at image, and so what was the vibe? What did they want to feel? What's the soul feel like? And my favorite answer, it's on the next slide, but we heard a lot, liven it up, make it be alive. We want to feel energy in it. So there were 11 mentions and must be vibrant. I mean, I think it's a very important issue, and we want it social, and we want it social entertaining. I mean, it clearly defines what they think the soul of the village should be. And the next slide is, so this is sort of a different spin on atmosphere. So these are the people who are thinking a little bit more broadly. We want it to be known as a water community. We want its own entity, not Quincy. Be a destination location, have a cohesive look. Whatever is done, do not do it bigger, do it better. And so before you change that, Ken, my number one comment that I still smile about is the top one: purify and originate the village and the town. So, and that's primarily your younger voters. And
what does purify mean?
not sure, not sure.
Well, is reoriginate, reorient? Because that's been part of our, you know,
No,
sort
they
of what
s-
we've talked about for 5 years is why is Main Street Main Street? You know, because why do we have everything facing away from the water?
They did say reoriginate, so I interviewed 6 20 to 30-year-old citizens. And so they come from a very different world. And none of them had been involved with Wareham Village, and I think only one had come through the Wareham School process. And so they're looking at, what is it gonna be for me? You know, what should it be for me? But I thought it was amusing more than anything else, but that's where the younger citizen hung their hats.
So we need to burn some sage through the area for a little
Absolutely,
bit?
at minimum, at minimum.
Or get a Cat D9 and just start at one end and go to the other, if they really want to reoriginate.
I don't know, it'd be interesting to see what they suggest would be in plans. You know, if you took that conversation down to the next depth, it'd be very interesting. And we're gonna talk about building heights in this area, and this is the one area where we did prompt and encourage insight. And so there were 19 comments about the building's heights, and we really looked at asking them to consider what's more than 3 feet, four floors, 3 floors, 4 floors, 5 floors. And there was just an adamant direction from many of them that they would not support 4 or 5 floors. The one comment where the arrow is 2 people were behind that. A building height 5 stories, hard to accept, might work if upper stories are guaranteed residences. So, you know, looking at going forward, if it were me, I think it might take some hardcore modeling to make it really stand out and be accepted, is my guess. Next, please, Kim. So what we did, and so there's Jim's picture. So we really looked, and so when we talked to the people working in the town or heads of committees, we didn't have this part initially put together. But 51% of participants mentioned buildings before we even said we had pictures to look at. So we showed these 2 pictures. The picture on the left is Taunton, and I really appreciated getting this picture because it shows buildings that are 4 or 5 stories high, and it shows that you can have a juxtaposition skyline. They don't all have to be one height, they can be different. So we wanted to give a visual for people to be able to better understand that. And then the bottom picture, I think this comes from Ken. So we were looking at going down Main Street from the Narrows. And Ken, if we go to the next slide, we actually put together, Ken gave us these line drawings for which I'm very grateful. The drawing on the right, when we put that up and asked people to consider that against what the current profile looks like, that had a very positive acceptability level. But is it really still 3 or 4 stories? You know, hard to tell.
Question. I see that you stepped it, so you've kept the first floor, say the street level, roughly the same as what would be existing in a, you know, in some of those buildings. That's what you showed them, was the step back?
Yeah, and that's what they actually said, that looked acceptable. So, and it
So
was
it sounds
probably
like
3 or
height-
4.
If the further away from the street, whichever street it may be, going forward, you keep the height, the more acceptable height becomes. Is that a,
Well, that's a potential. Again, it's a small segment, but it got a positive result from the people who responded to this particular drawing.
I think what happens is if we use Merchant's Way, the air rights over that, and create the residential tower in the back of the property, it's gonna look pretty much like the existing Main Street it is right now, and you won't have the impact of the tower over the street. Like you do in the pond.
That's probably not a good 5-letter word to use, tower.
Yeah,
Trish? I'm wondering if you talked about sunlight, because.
No, I didn't.
Because let me just finish that comment. I think I was getting signatures for something, it was winter, because I remember ice on the other side of the street. I didn't get any sunlight from the east side because of those stories blocking until, I don't know, maybe noon. And I'm looking at the people across the street, and it's looking like they're never gonna get any sunlight. And it was a really cold day, and one of the things that's most important to me in a town is the feeling of light being present throughout. So that's one of the downsides of building up on the east side.
I thought the sun exposed from the other way, like Mama Mary's entrance gets a ton of sunlight to where they have to block it. That was my understanding.
Where's Mama Mary's in front?
Just, they're on the,
The pizza place across from the post office?
no,
No.
it's further down next to,
Across from Fazoli Square.
yeah,
Okay.
so,
Um,
as you can tell, I eat there quite a few times.
well, it depends on the season. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, the light certainly shifts, but I'm talking about winter when it's really cold and it just was so dark on that other side of the street.
So Annie, that's a good thing for us to put down about investigating further.
Yeah.
So if we go to the next slide, so this next series of slides, Richard Swenson had put together a set of slides when he was originally going to do an outreach, where I think they got one person to show up. So some of his slides were very good, and we showed all of them. And so the next sets are going to show you what citizens responded positively to the most. And this particular slide got 14 comments, which was the highest number of comments. And what they liked is they liked the feeling of the passage between Main Street and Merchants Way. This symbolizes a passage. They liked the outside, I mean, if you look at the other side pictures, the outside dining, and they mentioned specifically the trees, making sure there were trees. So this was #1 selection. And Ken, if we can go to the next one. So the next two both each got 11 participants responding to it. So this is a picture typically, that's a picture, go back one please, Ken. So this is a thin Main Street. So this is what they said they were comfortable with. And then the
this is
next,
Mashpee Common.
I don't think this is Mashpee, is it? I don't think so. That's what I thought. And then the next slide, I don't know which one this is. This might be Chatham, I don't know.
I don't think
It looks like we need to put a church in there as well, too.
Yeah. And Ken, to your point, they responded to that New England church architecture. And then if we go further, so both of these pictures got 7 responses. And again, on the left, we have a Main Street with a church. And on the right, we have a number of outside venues again. So again, that outside dining and the outside access is important. And you can basically see from the pictures they chose, they're definitely choosing New England look architecture.
Can I just back up one? You said they prefer the narrow street look?
I
That
said,
was like 2 or 3 slides before, but you said.
no, I didn't say they were,
Oh.
I said these are showing pictures of where it's a one Main Street way, but not,
Oh, okay.
not,
I misunderstood you, thank you.
you know what, sometimes I misunderstand me, so,
I was thinking it was.
yeah. Where you looked at,
counterintuitive, really.
you know, where you looked at what they liked was, what they responded to was the pass-throughs, the narrow pass-throughs between, that we would see between Main Street and Merchants Way. They
Yeah,
thought,
which we do have.
and they liked the fact that they were being dressed up. Yeah, and there was conversation that everybody wanted. I mean, those who talked about it were very positive about needing those pass-throughs, and no one said we don't need them. Yeah, so.
One more comment. I'm very familiar with New Bedford, and that could be New Bedford actually, because of the church right there. But I consider when people say the New England look, looking at these pictures, if that represents, that it's a hodgepodge. It's a history of the New England town with some that are really old buildings. Some of the residents may have been there from the 1800s, like mine, but they may have had storefronts reformed, upgraded. But it's not a one look like a Cape Village kind of thing.
No, it's not a Mashpee Commons.
It's not Mashpee
Yeah.
Commons at all.
Yeah.
I have a question. In all these pictures, I sense very little sensitivity to the fact that the whole downtown Wareham is in a flood zone. And if you tore any building on Main Street down in order to rebuild it, its first floor would have to be 12 or 14 feet higher than it currently is. So how are you gonna put restaurants and cafes on Main Street if they're gonna be 12 feet in the air?
That wasn't discussed.
I'm just,
Yeah. There was one, when we get a little bit further on, in the parking group, there was one area where we discussed that. And basically, regardless of who we were talking to, they kind of just put it aside. So,
I just, you know,
Yeah,
bring
I
it up
agree
that
with you,
it should
Jim.
be- It should somehow that, you know,
Yeah.
you need to temper all these
yep,
ideas with the thought that, I mean,
Yeah.
Danny Warren's trying to put that thing down at the old Greer lumber, and he's gotta prove that if a flood comes, his kitchen's gonna be up out of the water, or they're not gonna, you know, et cetera, so.
and I absolutely concur with you on that. That wasn't the purpose for me to
No, I
get
got
that
it.
from this, but yeah. And if you talk next phase, that's a realistic point that has to be addressed and brought forward. I mean, absolutely. So if we go on to the next one, and by the way, if anybody wants the total set of slides that these people were shown, because there are ones that are not in here, let me know and I'll make sure I have it for you. And then this was the last one. Again, there were 6 participants mentioned this view. And this is the first view that I see, actually, where you see some taller buildings. So, and I would say that's as far as we went in terms of building design. And so we had some miscellaneous buildings input also, like get rid of the gas stations, make sure you have entry and exits on both Main Street and Merchants Way, clean up the backside of buildings, have interesting architecture, and create or encourage hospitality inns. And that may belong actually in another category also. Yeah.
Trish,
Yeah,
were trees discussed at all?
the trees were only discussed when people brought them up, and they did bring them up during the time that we looked at those pictures and said, yeah. And we do discuss green space, so there's a piece on green space, but it doesn't talk about trees specifically.
Just, you know, I remember back in 2013 or so when there was a study done for Wareham Village. It was done by CETA, which was, you know, the WRA's predecessor. They talked about Merchants Way. They set up rain gardens. They did have some trees interspersed along there. So that's something that certainly is available to us to look at, that was previously discussed in a sort of a prior revision, if you will,
And
for the area, so.
it might have been in one of the previous slides, and I just didn't focus on it, or it might be coming up. There were a set of, during the course of this, I think 4 people, each one of them mentioned different plans or reports or projects that had been done on this, and said, why aren't we looking at those as well? And so there is definitely a need to call those up and pull from them what is applicable and use them as an additional input.
Yeah.
So we also talked about residences, and of course, part of this is understanding if Wareham Village should be zoned multi-use. And honestly, I think the assumption from most people was it just is multi-use. I mean, there was no pushback about residents at all. And you can see residents or residences, we had 9 comments basically say residences are a must, that people must be living and working in the village. And if you look at the bottom one, we just expect that to be part of the change, and residents are key. So, and nowhere did anyone say, no, we do not want residents in the village. So this, in my mind, is a non-issue. And now we're gonna go on to stores and businesses. And so restaurants are pretty straightforward. They want a whole bunch of different ones, and they want them to have access from Merchants Way. And the 2 big things were, especially, we want trucks. We want them not just in Bessie Park, we want them on Merchants Way, we want them in different places. And we had one comment, which I thought was interesting. We want higher end, i.e. Panera. And so I think your definition of higher end is
Maybe a little different than
varies.
more cosmopolitan people perhaps?
And I also X'd out who they said
Four
versus. You know, it was like, and so we seem to do restaurants okay here in the village. I mean, that seems to be happening. So this is, I think, along with residences, these are subjects that have to be included, but they're non-issue subjects. Now, the retail store one was interesting. So 62% of participants mentioned what kind of businesses or stores they wanted in the village. And so these top red, they were each 10 comments. We want boutiques, we want art stores and artists, and we want an ice cream and soda shop. I mean, 10 different people named those 3 different things.
Yeah, we have an ice cream shop.
Yeah,
They
so
must
you
be-
have them, but we're saying in this village that you're designing, what do you
Yeah.
want?
Yeah,
So it
okay.
isn't that you have them, it's
It's what
what do
will
you
be there,
want?
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a big focus on artistic creativity, even artistic classes. And if you go down to the next one, bookstore, there were 8 comments. We want a bookstore, and we want it with a restaurant or a cafe in it. I couldn't believe how many people independently said, we want a bookstore.
We will put the Barnes and Noble next to the Panera, and everybody will be happy.
And the other areas that were mentioned repeatedly were antique stores, and we want to be able to get fresh produce down there. We want some type of market, not a CVS market, or we want a farmer's market. But we want, if you're going to have residents there, we want to have access to food there, or we want a general store like Marion has. So they were pretty open, and then these are miscellaneous business comments. With the new schools and hospital there, what kind of businesses in Wareham Village do we really need to consider? Are they impacted, what we have, by those 2 specific things happening? And the other big point to me is there's no good professional spaces right now. You know, I think we have some lawyers down there, and we have a bank, but where are our other professional offices? So not a specific, but they want them. And in terms of planning, people were recommending that you reach out to people who have a vision. So they were saying, yeah, we'd like some of our own people to be together, to have insight in this, and it should be people with vision. And so,
The interesting one on that one, Tricia, was, what was it, the small stores?
yeah,
What will it take to do that?
yeah.
It will take them to come and buy things from the store.
Well, and it will take them, but I think I know there was conversation, and it's on one of the other slides where, in the development, looking for incentives, is the conversation was that it's so costly to open a store in Wareham now, that if you want small businesses, you have to be able to give them a way to see that it's going to be productive for them. So that's really where that's coming from.
Trish, are people seeing a lot of the patrons for new commerce, new shops and all?
Are they seeing what?
Are they seeing patrons for these choices of stores, wait a second,
Yeah?
as coming from tourists or being sustainable by the general population?
That's actually addressed maybe on another slide, but it wasn't addressed in this. It was addressed in parking, where we talked about how do you want parking handled, and if there's a cost, or how do you classify people who would park as village residents, town residents, visitors, etc. So that's the only place that that showed up, but, I mean, it really applies right across. Annie, I think that's a good point. So I would say next slide, Ken. So marketing of Wareham Village, and this is kind of interesting, is there was a number of mentions, there were 6 mentions about whatever you do in terms of marketing, keep it up to date, let us know what's happening, let us know how we work with it, what we do with it, and they consider that marketing. And then the next largest mention was fill the empty store windows with artwork and history things from the town. And Ken, if you can hit the next thing. In my mind, all of this stuff is important. You know, it's how do you get the money for marketing? How do you leverage different assets to help you with the marketing? How do you keep your marketing up to date? How do you put marketing out that attracts tourists and jobs and people? It really is, along with the redevelopment of Wareham Village, has to come a full-fledged marketing plan too, and it needs to be extensive. It needs to go out over a 3-year period. So you'd have, you know, heavy emphasis on 12 to 18 months and then continuing emphasis, because the only way you're going to get that village to be productive is to make people aware it's there. And so this could be another whole conversation just by itself. So Ken, the next slide. And so we had 8 comments about events also. And these events, well, they stand alone, and they said we want our events back. We want these things to be happening in the village. And, you know, of course, some of them aren't because of COVID. Some are not because we're not doing them anymore. But they feel events are part of the wakening up of the village again. And the benefit is if you have events and you're marketing them, not just within the town, but to the nearby towns, that flow over from the acknowledgement that those events are happening, the attendance of them goes a long way to making this particular, would make Wareham Village vibrant and alive the way they're asking for it. Green space. It's particularly important, and it must be there to be successful. So this starts to talk about what it should look like, where it should go. It's interesting that they've already decided where you should tear down and put green space. So get rid of the old gas station, move CVS, and build green space over Merchants Way. So they're actually visualizing where their green space is going. They didn't, Linda, mention trees, but my assumption is trees are part of green space. And it's an assumption on my part. Right here, the second, design needs to pay attention to trees. Build out to enhance what the village is and can be. So there was a lot of, 31% of citizens went to talk about green space, and I honestly thought that was more than what I thought I would hear. And then we had 24% talk about safety and security, and they tied, there's not a slide separate on lighting because lighting was seen as part of safety. And you had 10 comments saying add lighting sufficient to make it feel safe and secure. Lighting like Onset without the T and Buzzards Bay. And they look at that as part of security as well. There was 4 comments on security police, even beat cops. more crucial as social evening businesses increase from both Main Street and Merchants Way. And, going down the list, there were those who are retired or elderly saying it needs to be made safe for me to feel comfortable going down there, especially in the evening, and part of that safety is lighting. And so I think this safety issue, 24% of the group stated it without being encouraged to. I think you'd see as we go on, there'll be a much stronger focus on this particular issue. So, so the next is parking. And so there were two sides of the coin here. One side, get Merchants Way cleaned up and organized, and there'll be plenty of parking. One was, and so this is where Ken, if you can go to the next slide, and then we'll go back up again. So one of the previous studies showed, this is a picture of downtown where the red part is the part of the building that's out towards Merchants Way. And this particular report suggested that the building be raised so that there could be parking under the buildings, and then the front of the building would be even with Main Street, but your structure would start from there with parking under a place. So if we could go back, Ken, then thank you. So you'll see plus and minuses here where some say underground parking is okay. It can be under a building. They named Stonebridge as one. They said there's underground parking there under that building. That works. There's not a lot of it, but it's there. And then some were not supportive. And then you had people supportive of parking towers, parking garage, multi-floor parking garage, and others saying absolutely not. I mean, this was one area where they all agreed it needed to be addressed, both on Main Street and Merchants Way. They acknowledged there was a concern for parking around certain areas currently, like Verilife, and they all agreed that something needed to be done, and you could almost split them down the middle on what was acceptable and what wasn't. So this is an open area that, again, I think modeling, true modeling would help show how this would work out and be a lot more acceptable.
It's kind of funny, earlier you talked about the people who wanted a walking village.
Yeah.
But yet people want to park right near where they're gonna walk, apparently. You hear complaints about, on Main Street, when there were businesses, say 10 years ago, it was more vibrant, a little more sort of retail, a couple more retail places and so on
See
and
the
so forth.
backside of the planet, see this parked way out near Cranberry Highway, or they park at the front door?
Well, there you go. It's like the people that go to the Y, they park as close as they can. I park at the other end of the Y, another quarter-mile in, but, that's
The only
just me.
country that drives 10 miles can walk on a treadmill.
Yeah, so that's a good point. And that's kind of just it,
I'm the one.
You go to North Dartmouth Mall, and, it's Christmas season, okay, I'll park 200 yards away and walk. You go to Wareham Village, damn, there isn't a spot right in front of that store. Screw it, I'm going to the plaza.
Well,
And that's, unfortunately, there's a lot of that.
I'm driving a little Mini Cooper, so I park as far away as possible so somebody won't hit me, and if I could bet it, I would be wealthy. You guys wouldn't see me here right now. When I come out, the largest truck or van in the whole parking lot is beside me. Because they might think there's more space or something.
Yeah.
So parking is we need to further address, and there's an awareness from the folks we talked to that there are some issues. It
Yeah,
needs to be addressed with no answers.
I think the more we listen to people's comments about, one of the things about the alleys, through buildings to Merchants Way, is to be able to see that beautiful marsh, the swans, the whole landscape there. I used to bank at TD only to see the view from deposits. And I think the more greenery there is, the more green space, the more pleasant that walk is, I think that the more
they'll do
they
it.
want to walk. I want to walk in a really attractive downtown. But it has to have that vibrance of living trees, plants.
Yeah. And I agree with all that, absolutely. If you look at this top bullet here, it was on the other slide, I didn't pay attention to it. Parking was of interest enough to this group that 45% of respondents brought it up. So that's a big point. And I think the only one that beat it was what kind of stores do you want, which was 51%. So Ken, can we go to the next one? Traffic. So one of the other favorite topics. But only 22% talked about it, and my guess is, and it's a guess, and I probably shouldn't even say it, but I'm guessing the people who commented on it are people who drive through there versus those who go and occasionally visit. And it breaks out into a couple of groups that turn off to Pinehurst is becoming dangerous, the roadway's one way, you need to make it that way. These all had the same number of responses, five equal responses. The pot stores are making traffic very dangerous. Now, on the blue end, we had 4 responses. I mean, these were almost equally felt things across the board. So put traffic control in place for both vehicles and people. And the number one issue, traffic is the number one issue, especially as more development happens. And then the one I liked best has the yellow arrow beside it, and it says a traffic control study and traffic design study needs to be done, and it needs to be done safely so that these things happen safely. And if the whole Wareham Village area is going to be revitalized, this is the time to look at that. You know, what going forward with what's planning to be there, whether it's more residents, whether it's different types of business, and where they're located, what really has to happen. Do we need lights? Do we need usage of Depot Street and guiding certain traffic off the other side of Wareham Village, or what do we do with it?
Yeah, did anybody mention tractor trailer trucks or any of those big?
No, they didn't. No,
I
not,
always thought they sneak through rather than staying on 28.
they do sneak through.
Well, the issue you have there is that Route 6,
Yeah,
and you're not gonna throw tractor trailers off of Federal Highway,
yeah.
so, or
So-
federally funded highway, I should say.
Ken, question, has that idea of one-way traffic down Main Street and one-way down Merchant Street ever been tried before or broached before?
It has been brought up before, yes.
The former CETA director was nearly tarred and feathered over it, I believe.
Really?
Yeah, that was he brought that up, and the response was very negative from the community. I thought it was an interesting idea.
Okay.
In fact, it's an idea that was brought up 40 years ago, like to know the truth. Yeah.
It's-
I don't go back that far, Judy. The town, at least.
I wanted to call it Bacadecus as opposed to, you know, because it didn't have a name. And I thought Bacadecus was cute.
Well, times seem to be changing because there was no pushback on not doing that with Merchants Way, other than the few people who said that's where our parking should be. And so here's one of my favorite topics, benches. 45% of participants mentioned benches and parking. And it wasn't just senior citizens who mentioned this. It was, we need places to be able to sit, not just where there is green space, but if we're waiting for someone to pick us up, whether it's GATRA or something else, and we want it in the village, both on the Merchant Way side and the Main Street side, but we want it throughout the town. We want it wherever GATRA stops. We want it where food stores are. We want the benches where healthcare stuff is. So for a subject that I wasn't even thinking about, it really interested me on how many people brought it up of all different age groups. So that's for that slide, if anyone has any questions. And then we want to talk about the waterway. 45% of participants mentioned the water. and access to it is a must. The rivers and marshes are beautiful, clean them up. It needs a facelift every 20 years. It should be planned on doing that. And do mini redos, they said, about the water design, and they referenced like Boston. So, and then there was 9 mentions about the backwoods and cleaning the waterway all the way through to the backwoods, which I'm assuming means going up through towards Tremont Nail, through that whole area there. 8 mentions about they need a scenic waterway to look at, and references like you can go the gateway and go out on their patio and eat out there. Stonebridge, again, you can sit and look at the water. And so very much a request for having that type of capability for the Wareham Village area. And then there were a number of comments, not just the 4 here, but on and off about what activities can we use for the water? Where's the fishing piers? Where's the kayaks? How do we get water activities up and running again?
The railroad is a massive complicating factor in that.
It is.
Could also be an opportunity. If the T is gonna stop in Wareham Center, rather than see it as an objection, make it an opportunity and build around it. Put your walkway in the water, put a dock, put a walkway right out over the river from Tremont Nail all the way down to the Narrows, a boardwalk, and park all the cars up at the old Tremont Nail. Yeah, you're gonna cut some trees down to make the parking lot, but they can get in and out of there a hell of a lot safer than they can through downtown. And they'll wanna walk along the water and feed grain to the bass and the bluefish, we can't put koi fish in there. But,
Well, I think if the T does come, it actually presents a bit of an opportunity. Because you're not dealing with, just the Mass Coastal and just the trash trains and everything else. The MBTA, we have a different sort of relationship with them. We contribute to them because we're one of the communities that's, X amount distance.
put a trolley on the tracks and run it between Onset and Wareham Center. Onset was historic. It was before the bridges. Onset was the place to go, and they had what they called the dummy train. They named the bridge after, they called it Dummy Bridge. They went from the White Rabbit into Onset Center. Why can't we run a dummy train and take care of our parking and put them out of town, let them get in and out, get off the highway park and take the dummy train into Wareham? You're a captive audience, you're not getting out of here if you take our train back to your car.
The one thing I want to go back to is there were people who said, and it was way up in the development phase, we reported it, make sure people know we're a water community. They said that in marketing as well. There were several people who said we're a town that should be known as an environmental center. And while we had these conversations, I have to keep my thoughts to myself. However, here, too bad, you're going to put up with them. No. I really would encourage us to look at, if we're going to be known as something, let's make us an environmental tourist opportunity. And that starts first right with the water out behind Merchants
Way. If the
Way.
Mayflower was parked out on Merchants Way, you wouldn't have to worry. It would happen all by itself.
Yeah.
Well, it's on the town seal. You've got a Native American, in a canoe. So,
Yeah, so we need to start living up
I know a few
to it.
wild Indians still run a canoe out back.
We need to start living up, we need to look at, as we replan, I would hope we need to look at how we incorporate a huge part of what we do around this concept.
We can convert to a retiree with a kayak.
Exactly.
Right?
I haven't heard about bikes in all of this. Do you cover that?
Nope, because nobody mentioned them.
Okay.
Okay.
Bikes?
Bikes. I think, actually, I think there was,
Harley Davidsons or
No, pedal
Kawasaki's,
bikes.
I think there was a mention someplace about bike paths or something. I'd have to go back and read all of these, but it wasn't a subject that came up, really. It's probably one that would be good to have, but it did not come up. In terms of, the rest of these are comments specific to Merchants Way, and 51% of participants provided some type of input on Merchants Way. In this particular group, there were 9 comments total. So overall, make it more attractive, clean it up, get rid of the dirty, unusable, overgrown stuff. When you see me writing in all caps, it's because the person or people who were talking to me then were really adamant about this is an issue and we really want to address it. So when you see occasional all caps, that's where it comes from. Make the waterway safe to use, to be in and on. So they're saying we want to be in it as well as on it. And the backwoods, open it up and prune it. So we had those comments, and is there any, there might be one more, oh, there's a couple more after. This one just talks about our favorite subject, the trash bins, and getting rid of them.
13 locations,
doing
22
them.
bins. I did my own survey like 3 years ago.
Yeah, so one way or other, address them and get rid of them. And there were 17 comments on cleaning up Merchants Way, not just the waterway, but the actual Merchants Way in general. And I kind of, I mean, I think it's a precluded issue, decided issue. If you're going to put new businesses back there or new residences looking out of there, it's got to be cleaned up, period.
Yeah.
I mean, you won't get one to happen without the other happening. And then lastly, we had a couple of comments on Merchants Way and the commuter rail, and clearly thinking that it would be good, get it in, those people who said they were interested in it, and clean up the utilities, the leaning over poles, the falling down wires, someone said put them underground. So those were the Merchants Way comments, and I don't think that there's anyone in this room that doesn't already know all those, but here it is coming out of some portion of 55 people. Any other questions?
I'll go around. Derek?
I always go last.
I'll go.
Go around. Jim?
Annie?
Jim.
Jim,
What is it?
do you have a
That's
question?
the question.
Oh, I have so many questions, there aren't enough hours in the month.
Yeah.
That
What's your top 2?
My top 2, how are we gonna get aerial flights flying on, aerial views of Cape Cod out of Wareham Center from Merchants Way, Come take an air ride, come fly on a biplane off the water. How are we gonna get a dummy train from the old nail factory, take me down to Hyannis and back? How are we gonna do this? I mean, I got ideas. I mean, people think I smoke dope. I come up with so many ideas, but the question is, how are you gonna fund it? Where's the money coming from? You give me the money, I'll make Wareham a bustling community. But there's gotta be an investment, and it's gotta come from somewhere, and I don't see the citizens paying for it. I honestly don't, I'll use the same example I used with you when we spoke. People from Shangri-La screamed and yelled, "We want water, we want water, we want water," and they went to town meeting and they voted for water. And then when they got their sentiments, they got their betterment bills, they said, "This isn't fair, nobody told us." Well, you want it, you pay for it. So there's a lot of people in the community that think they know what they want, but they really don't know what's involved. So I think maybe the first step is education. People need to know that Wareham is underwater in the 100-year plan. And, and again, if I owned a business on Main Street, what's my motivation to, me personally, I certainly want my side of the building facing the water to look nice. Because I think if you have a trashy appearance, you're gonna attract a trashy clientele. So, but, has the town gone to everybody that's facing Merchants Way and say, hey, you know, we'll match your investment on the back of your building with an incentive. If you spend $40,000 on your facade, we'll give you 40 cents back in tax relief, or 40%, or...
Well, I think Sal Pena came up with something for the businesses on Main Street, on the Main Street, the facades and so on and so forth. And I think they even upped the ante that it would be, what, 75%? Because they were looking, I think, to put the community development block grants out for that, or some kind of grant or something like that. And the town was going to fund 75% of the facade improvements, and the owner would do 25%, and he didn't get one bite.
So did somebody go knock on every door and say that? And say, hey, we'll give you 75%?
I think he tried.
Because in the real estate business, I've experienced people coming from out of town want to take advantage of money. I call it free money, grants. So, you know, people want to take advantage of money in Wareham in places that the people that own the businesses in Wareham don't even know exist. That's pretty sad.
I think we're experiencing some turnover of legacy owners that paid.
Oh, yeah,
paid
there's
them
some
off
knuckleheads there that wouldn't do anything no matter what. I'm not saying that isn't part of the problem, but, you know.
And that ownership stagnation, it was a huge issue there, because let's face it, you owned the building for 40 years, you paid the mortgage off 25 years
The
ago.
rents you're collecting.
You got 4 units in there, you got 3 tenants. They're not making you rich, but they're paying the taxes, they're paying the insurance, and, you know, 1 unit is doing that, and the other 2 units is gravy in the pocket. Why do I want to go put 50 grand on this side of the building? Because that's my profit for a year and a half out of here, I don't want to do that, and so that's where you get the stagnation from.
You know, between Cumberland Farms and 191 Main Street, I can't think of the name of the owners, but they've been under agreement for a year. For a year, they've been under agreement.
Oh, the Halsey?
The Halsey property.
Yeah.
And the buyer that wants to buy it, reportedly, wants to tear it right down past the foundation and put something else brand new in its place. And the seller says, great, we've agreed on the price, buy it. And the fire department says, oh, wait a minute, we won't bless the sale until you put a new alarm system in for 30 grand to contact the fire department. And the buyer says, why am I gonna spend 30 grand for something I'm gonna tear down? And the seller says, well, we agreed on the price, I ain't spending 30 grand, I don't need it, I'm collecting rent. So there it sits,
Well, they've also got the,
there it sits.
they did an audit on the gas station cleanup from 20-something years
Yeah.
ago.
Yeah,
And-
from Speedy, yeah.
Yeah, you know, shockingly, the cleanup wasn't done so well, and there's, now you got petroleum hydrocarbons down under that building or along the street and everything else, so. Tearing it down might be the option exercised just to clean up the contamination.
Yeah, the problem is the contamination started at the gas station, but the water underground, or the foam,
Yeah, pulls it.
goes underneath somebody else's property, and of course the origin is the responsible party, but
So-
again, if you don't have a super fund that's gonna fund it, it's just gonna be, hey, look at the old Wareham laundromat. It's just sitting there. Why is it sitting there? Because it's dirty. It's dirty because for years and years and years, the chemicals that were used to do dry cleaning got dumped on the ground, and
Yeah, everybody just dumped out the back door. And that's impacted the residences next door to it. They've got air sparging going on in their basement, so.
So those are big,
those are real problems.
they're big issues.
And if there's a super fund to clean it, then that's where the emphasis should be.
So-
If not, then go back to growing corn. If you build it, they will come.
And I agree with you on that. I'm not supposed to give opinions, but when the hell did I ever not? I think that's more than critical. I think there's a layer, I think that's the cake. That's the really tough stuff. But I'm also looking at the icing on the cake, which is what a lot of these people, citizens, are looking at. is, I know there's an area where, off of Main Street, where some apartments are supposedly be going up. There's been 5 businesses sold. I don't know what else is being torn down. We have a town that has a vision for whatever happens down there. We don't have any templates. We don't have any guidelines on what or how, what is expected on what you build there. I mean, if you go to Chatham or you go to Falmouth, they got direction. You want to tear it down, you want to build something up, that's great. Whatever it ends up looking like, it has to fit within this template. As long as we don't have that, we have no idea what's going to go down there and if it even will be marketable ever again, just because of how it will physically look. So I look at this project as a purely layperson. You can tell by my conversation, but there is this whole layer, Jim, that is the cake. This is the body of it that has to be
Everybody
addressed.
likes to lick the frosting, but you know, when Henny Penny said, "Who will help me make this bread?" nobody wanted to help her make the bread.
Yep.
But when it was baked, man, there were plenty of people who were there ready to eat it.
And the other half of it is, yes, this is icing, but icing is what's visible, and icing is what people buy into. So there has to be something in place that helps direct what that icing is. And unfortunately, when you cook a cake, or fortunately, you cook the cake, it cools, and you ice it. In this situation, the cake's going to be cooking and the icing's going to be happening all at once, or maybe even backwards. And so I would just encourage whatever happens here that we look at making sure it, to best ability, it meets what the citizens want and will buy into and will support in order to get it to happen.
Well, we have design guidelines and performance standards already written up and ready to go.
Perfect.
Those were in the zoning bylaw that we didn't proceed with because we backed off and decided to go back through this process first and think about it a little bit more and come up with a vision of the downtown
That's
that people
great.
understood.
Yeah, I didn't know that stuff existed, Ken. That's good.
The other thing with regard to any of the environmental remediation down there is there are, you know, mass development does have the brownfields. Grant money available for assessment and low-interest loans available for remediation. I've actually written a couple of those for people. And, you know, it can help somebody coming in who wants to develop but is concerned about those expenses and doesn't want to take those things on
They're just
themselves.
not gonna take them on if they, you know, there's other opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, if you, exactly, I mean, I'm an environmental attorney. If somebody comes to me and says, you know, should I deal with the Brownsfield and do it on my own, or should I go to the clean site? I mean, my answer is gonna be the same 100% of the time.
Yeah.
But those funds are available, and, you know, people who are savvy in the development world take advantage of them. I did one for a guy in New Bedford. The guy was an absolute genius. He had contamination on the property. Rather than go through the expense of digging up the contamination and getting it off the property, he built ramps up to the second floor of this old mill building, and guess where the contamination went?
Under the building,
In the concrete vault
Yeah.
that the ramp...
encapsulated.
So, yeah,
They did that at BU too.
yeah.
Well, they did it on the second or third phase, they didn't do it in the beginning. They
Yeah.
spent millions of dollars trucking it out of town before they realized all they had to do was bury it. They spent millions of dollars to haul the dirt out, and then they spent billions of dollars to haul clean dirt in, when all they had to really do is use it.
Yeah, once you entomb it, that's it. Your cleanup is done.
But, you know, yeah, I mean, if, as a town, if Wareham wants the village to survive and wants the village to thrive, then the town has to be the, what am I trying to say?
The driver?
The parent,
The driver, yeah.
The driver,
Yeah.
because nobody, you know, people just not, you know, I've had deep pocket after deep pocket after deep pocket. Look at parts of downtown Wareham, and what scared them away is not the potential of what could be, as far as return on investment. What scared them away was the potential of what could be as far as punitive damages if they open up a can of worms. If I do this, is this gonna expose that, and am I gonna end up being liable for cleaning up this mess?
Yeah.
I have a couple of things that start with the not expensive parts. And one of the things that I focus on all the time as I drive around is that our trees in all of Wareham are being suffocated and snapped by the invasives. And I think that if we did some education, bought some cutters, I have them in my car, so when I park somewhere, if they're invasives, I can snap them. But all these trees, these old trees that would be thriving if it weren't for these vines that are coming up and snapping them off, are going to be gone. We won't even have trunks around. So to me, access to our downtown is really important. And I think we can work with improving our forest. We don't even have a tree warden. I think that's really critical to a downtown being attractive. In New Bedford, we have a storefront reimbursement. You get $2,000 for materials. So people do much better signage. You can have that on the front and the back. And then I think maybe, well, we also had a redevelopment that I was a part of, project, and just hanging plants. Can't even remember if we have hanging plants in downtown in the summer. That's a form of vegetation that's really attractive and makes a big difference. And I think if we opened up some of those channels so that you could see the waterway at more intervals, these things don't necessarily have to cost a lot of money.
There is a cost. A tree warden it's a hired employee.
Yeah.
There is the extra maintenance and landscape. And I love hearing citizens help out with the work. There is cost. The reimbursement cost of $2,000. These are all the things that add up, and it's not a negative. It's just the idea. It's the steps we want to do, and this is kind of, and I'm hearing from reading this. One of the things is how tough it is to be a part of a community, right? Because there's many different views on things. One, don't bring in investors, but clean this up, but don't use my tax dollars. Yeah, it's subsidize the businesses, but don't use my tax dollars. Do this work, but don't use tax dollars. Don't use. So it's for me, it's always almost a sense of failure, because my life, from personally, I'm going to go from here, would be so easy if I could just say yes, snap my fingers, and do all these. We don't have a tree division anymore. We used to have a full division that just went out and trimmed trees and did that. That was all they did. We had a division for the cemeteries. We actually had a building and maintenance division. None of that stuff exists anymore. And as we've been going down, and the whole goal has been to maintain the current service levels that we have without putting more burden onto the residents. And part of that is trying to, we're almost in this chicken and the egg. We need development to come in so we can give services back. Because we've heard loud and clear from the community, there's no more extra money to send into the pot. So we're just in this vicious cycle. And which one's going to really give when it comes down to it? And that's my concern on this. I mean, there's other ways to get monies in, there's one-time monies, and I think that's what we need to focus on, is one-time things that the town can do and change. We can do one-time things. You can use CDBG funds, but it's the maintenance thereafter and such that the town cannot do. We can't pick that up. So everything we need to think about, coming from sort of the town's aspect, is to get something going, to do the one-time, but then either the investors, the building owners, or whomever, like the Wareham Garden Club that does a beautiful job with the flowers, are the ones that have to take that over, unless we can generate more revenue into the pot to start doing these. And it's not to poo-poo all these. These are, I mean, this stuff, I love downtown. That's where I spend a lot of the time, and
I have a lot of views of how it could be so much better, and they're right in line with everybody. But that's the nexus that we're trying to get through. From the ideal village, what we have today with a lot of people trying hard too. Those business owners are great. We've had a bakery that was down there that didn't work out. We've had that bookstore, which was the used bookstore. The best bookstore I've ever seen is The Unlikely Story in Plainville, Mass. But Jeff Kinney of the Diary of the Wimpy Kid, he did that. That's been his project. He doesn't need to get the revenue back out of it. So it's kind of, the town needs to incentivize these businesses. Some of it's financial, but the town doesn't have the funds or the backing to put those funds in to do it. And that's, it's frustration. I'm sorry to
No,
go.
you're right on target. I mean, the Toby Homestead is a very, very perfect example of let's ice the pan, let's not worry about the substance. We took a cake pan, we turned it upside down, we frosted it was a wonderful looking wedding cake, but you couldn't cut into it because it was just icing on a pan. I think it was $600,000 through donations was spent on the Toby Homestead. And the deal was, okay, now somebody take it and rent it, triple net. That means if it needs new windows, the tenant pays for it. If it needs the lawn mowed, the tenant pays for it. So they took this beautiful building that everybody thought was a great idea, and they spent $600,000 worth of donations and taxpayers' monies and so forth and so on, and it was financially not feasible to run as anything. It couldn't be any kind of business, it couldn't be any kind of anything. The building couldn't support itself. What a waste of time and money.
Derek, I understand your position is from the top of the pyramid, looking at the funding and all that's the base and not having it and getting into that vicious cycle, as you said. I was thinking about, vine cutting as a social event, and now it just popped in my mind, Matt Buckingham does this with picking up trash. People love going out with Matt Buckingham for a trash event. And I think if maybe there's the education and maybe the donuts and the cider, something, that because people want to be together and we want to improve. I don't think that the energy is lacking. I think the vision of how do citizens get involved, and I think this project is a great start because it's saying what the people want. So then it's the enlisting, and maybe there's a new program in the high school that's, Kids for the Environment, because they are scared of what's happening with the environment, and they could be our greatest environmentalists, but we need to think of some avenues for them to feel productive. So I don't think that we have to despair about this, but I do think that we're all thinking, maybe we need to start with some of the things that aren't dependent on grants and taxes and all of that.
Thank you.
I agree with you, and I think I said it to you, Tricia, which is we should be moving Main Street up to High Street and thinking about the fact that that piece of real estate is going to be underwater. I don't know when, but I know it is going to be underwater. Every single map is showing that. So it's great to clean it up, and just so that you know, Don't Trash Wareham is an 8-year-old program where the high school students and, neighborhood people go around and they pick up crap that other people throw out. The Key Club at the high school does that as well every year, even though Don't Trash Wareham has taken a hiatus, I guess. I think that making it pretty is nice, but you're not really addressing the fact that you can't put an underground, you had a slide with a building with parking underneath. You're at water level. You can't do that. The building has to go up.
I think they're talking about the grade difference, Judy. It's Main Street versus sort of the back end. You can see a grade difference on it, including all the way down to the fire station with a little increase on the front. So they're not talking about digging into the ground. it's technically above ground, but it's underground.
Oh, okay, then I misunderstood that.
The buildings have to go up.
Yeah.
Yeah, the buildings have to go up.
If you were gonna build Wareham to meet FEMA regulations right now, when you drive down Main Street,
16 feet.
you'd be able to look under every building and see, from Main Street, you'd be able to see the water.
Right.
The only thing that would be blocking your view would be the cars that are parked there. That's the only thing that you could legally,
Right.
righteously put there.
Right.
All the buildings would have to go up 12 to 17 feet to the first floor, higher than that. There's only one building in all of downtown Wareham that meets FEMA regulations, and it's probably one of the least appealing buildings, because the owner currently isn't really willing to invest a lot of money into the building if it's gonna get torn down.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
you know, to that point, it's kind of interesting though, because we talk about the height you would need to deal with the flood zone regs, but that's almost exactly the same number that the fire district would want to be able to get a fire truck in under something to fight a fire. So at least there's some congruence there in terms of what your height's gotta be.
All state highways, if you register a big truck, it can't be taller than 11 feet 12 inches. Every bridge in this state can't be built shorter than 14 feet 2 inches. So, I know this only because I took a triaxle log truck through Rhode Island and took a bridge out with it. But,
And then you went to Storrow Drive?
thank God, no, I just kept on going and looked in my mirrors and saw, oh, the car's behind me doing this, and, but the next time through, I saw that huge dent in the bridge. I knew where it came from.
so to your point, a lot of volunteers do a lot of stuff. Derek already mentioned the garden club. I mean, if there weren't those pretty pots on Main Street would look even more drecky than it does. Dreck. If you leave the E out of Derek, you get Dreck. And sometimes my fingers go faster than, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
It's subconscious she's doing that.
Correct is better than dread.
Yes,
Dread.
so I hear what everybody's saying. The concept of the boardwalk from Tremont Nail all the way down to Danny Warren's project. And here's somebody who doesn't owe Wareham anything, who's willing to put a lot of money into what I call key attraction, which will help move cleaning up Wareham downtown village.
I call him our Jeff Kinney, or
Yeah, okay, so here's a guy who's already several $1,000s, obviously.
Did you say
Yeah.
thousands?
Yeah, I'm being nice.
Okay.
I mean, I can imagine what it is.
He's well over 2 million spent without a bit of dirt being moved.
Yeah, probably. So we have all of these energetic people who actually are doing. We have people who have made great comments. The boardwalk has been on the drawing board for what, 20 years, Peter?
I don't know about that, but
15, anyway. That concept of connecting one end to the other. As Peter pointed out, the railroad is the problem. None of the other places that were up being, extolled have a railroad running through it. They might have a river running through it, but they don't have a railroad running through it. And that is a huge issue. It's not going to go away. The railroad isn't going to move either. So we have to see what we have and understand the science of what is going to be. Take the vision and move it to where it's safe, because it's not going to be safe there.
I think you maybe misjudge the bankers, the people who are investing in properties, as to what their intent is going to be. They're not going to invest in something that's going to be lost in short order. If they invest in the properties on Main Street, it's because they're going to get a return on investment in the time frame that's available to them, with given sea level rise, that is going to make the migration of Main Street going up the hill a real need. we are gonna have to migrate up the hill.
And Ken, with all due respect, I was a commercial banker for 23 years. I know exactly what commercial bankers and financing businesses looks like, so you're talking to the choir. It's gonna be really impossible to invest in water level property and know that you're safe. First of all, you can't pay the insurance premiums. They're terrible. So anything that is being done has to be above where it's going to be knocked out. The migration up the hill of Main Street is going to happen. And so
Whether it's retail or residential,
Yeah.
what you're saying is
it's got to go up the hill at some point. So all of these
Maybe.
great ideas and the great looks, I think we have to even be more proactive than Tricia has been. And see, and recognize the science. You just have to recognize the science. It's kind of like with COVID. You gotta recognize the science. You don't have to like any part of it, but you gotta recognize the science.
So Judith, I think you hit a key point, and it's part of why these two projects were run simultaneously, is we kept hearing from citizens that we don't know what's happening. We don't know what's going on in town. We don't know where to get this information. And one of the issues they pointed out specifically was Tremont Nail Factory. First, something was going to happen, we had a big to-do, then nothing happened, we don't know why, then something was going to happen and we don't know why. And so when we talk about educating our citizens, it's really about communicating with them. And so we have this information about what they want and what they see. And we have communication happen, sometimes really good, sometimes not. And they asked repeatedly, we want to know before, during, and after. So proactive, active, and reactive communication. And so what we have to do physically with Wareham Village, whether it migrates up, if you move it all to the top of Toby Road or whatever happens to it, the big thing that our citizens are telling us, this is what we feel about it, but if things are going to happen differently or in a different format, we want to be educated on it. We want to know what you're thinking about, because it impacts our life. We want to know when it's happening, and we want to know after the fact, and if it hasn't happened, why. And so that's where we actually got into running these two projects simultaneously. So it's real.
That's obvious from
Yeah.
what the information you've been able to show us has proven. You know, here's Shangri-La, not our Shangri-La, but the real Shangri-La. You know, and here's where we are. How do we balance what we would love to have and the fiscal facts, the scientific facts, and the I am not going to have my taxes raised to subsidize, you know, I mean, there are those three things that are really, and he deals with the tax thing every day. My pothole needs fixing. My street light needs fixing. I need another cop on the beat. I mean, there's only so much money.
So if you were asking me as a consultant, and you're not, I'm just here as a citizen, but again, I open my mouth, is if I were delivering this to a customer, I would be then delivering along with it a number of recommendations with it. So it's not my job to do that here. So as a citizen, I would recommend that first we tell them this, we've finished this project, and that their input's been great. You know, hey, we've spent this time with you, and we really appreciate it, whether we do that through Wareham Week or however we do it, or we do it multiple ways. I mean, we should actually.
That's why we're recording it today,
Yeah.
is to get it out there.
And that's a great reason. Also, so many people read the little newspaper Council of Aging puts out. You know, put a little article in there. do some other things with it, and set the parameters that we understand what you want, because we want it too. But we have to look at how we get there, and then start to look at how we put together an education strategy and project simultaneously to a communication process. And because we're talking, you know, if I were working, when I did work with digital or I did work with Dell, we talk about something like this, you talk about an implementation time period of 12 months, 18 months, 3 years, and 5 years. You can't make a change happen. Dell's a great one. I worked with them from the point in time when they sold only direct to when they started selling through distribution and indirect sales channels. And it took them a 3 to 5 year process to get their systems migrated over, their pricing migrated over, etc. So we talked today about our citizens know what they want. We haven't communicated with them necessarily as to the way they need to be communicated with. And so we start from today, number one, and we look at how we address those 3 processes. So you as town leaders, you know where you have to go forward to make it viable for the town. We need to work with you to understand where you're going to go, how we communicate with our citizens, and how we get them involved in moving forward. So and this change doesn't happen overnight. It's not an overnight thing. It is a situation where it's like when I was studying ballet for major exams. 1 year I couldn't do it, 2nd year I couldn't do it, 3rd year I might be able to do it, 4th year I did. Oh my God, 5th year I excelled. It's whatever we do in life, it doesn't happen overnight. We just have to work with our citizens to help them understand that and still hear their insight, their input, and use it.
Can we put a short version of this on the town website under WRA so that there's a link there and that would be advertised, but it actually would be on the town website and people could look at it. I would make it a little shorter, but.
So what I actually, Judith, what I have is I've created notes pages with this.
Okay.
So what I don't think you'd want to put out the slideshow. You'd want to put out a cover on it and says this one it is. You and I might want to review that quickly, review it with a few other people, say what can we cut, what needs to be added, and make
Yeah, you
that
could have a summary
available.
version, and you could direct people to the video of this if they really want to get down to the nitty-gritty. I think that would be the way to do it.
Can, you know,
Yeah.
be compressed. I mean, I think you did a great job, and thank you. I don't think anybody said thank you yet, but I'll be the first. It obviously took a lot of time. Obviously, a lot of people have a lot of really good ideas, and they're not ideas that are all new. Some of these ideas
No, some of them have been for a long
40
time.
or 50 years, and things change. We all know that. But you have used the word proactive several times. We need to be proactive. We need to react to this, but we need to proact to get where we think it would be better for everybody.
Exactly. And the reason I put it together like this, and I periodically have done projects like this, is when the recipient, or the customer, needs to know really what's the detail behind what you're recommending, the best way to do that is put out examples of the actual wording. And so that makes this a long read, but it makes it understandable that this is exactly what was meant. And, you know, we did at least 2 of these projects a year.
I think this dovetails nicely into the urban renewal plan that we're going to be proceeding on as well, too.
Well, yeah, I think it's, you know, Emily's hearing some things here today that she maybe didn't know, and she's been busy over there taking notes and so forth, so, because it does all dovetail into that, because your urban renewal plan is going to be absolutely, you know, inextricably linked to whatever zoning is created to try to make the urban renewal plan a reality, and vice versa. You're going to substantiate your zoning changes through the urban renewal plan that says, look, we've looked at it, these are the issues, these are the potential solutions. So it does all work there. Annie, was that a question?
Well, I'm thinking of small still, and I'm wondering how to keep the public's feeling that they're critical to this going. And I'm wondering if we could, I mean, just off the top of my head, have something called a going forward project of the month or the week, and it's publicized, and it's, it's a small goal that people coming together can achieve. And I can't I mean, there's always the trash pickup that Judith has already been being done and all. But I'd like, and have it in the paper that what are your ideas to meet this goal? To get the conversation so people get excited about sharing ideas, at least interested.
People easily get excited, they just very reluctantly fund. There was a lot of excitement over the Deacon School, but I still haven't heard any good ideas on all these wonderful things that are gonna happen with that property, but I don't know how the hell it's gonna get paid for. I honestly don't. You know, I mean, you go on, the Facebook warriors know the answer to everything except how to fund it. And I agree that communication component of this effort is gonna be very, very big, and every time, you know, I have a nice smooth way of putting some stuff. Every time some loudmouth gets on Facebook and starts talking about stuff that's totally inappropriate and inapplicable, there needs to be a link to shut them up. I mean, you know, don't spoil a good story with facts, but I still see things on Facebook about the puddle in front of the old 99 on Cranberry Highway. And that puddle's been fixed for a couple of weeks now. You know, where nobody could pass through there, but it's, you know, the money was being spent to fix that portion of the highway, and Facebook warriors got out there and you know, it was like riding on a roller coaster. I caught air on Cranberry Highway. Well, how the hell do you catch air at 35 miles an hour and go drive around the roads of Boston and see what bad roads are really like? So you're going to open it up to the public, you're going to open yourself up to a lot of criticism, a lot of input, and I'll encapsulate it with my electric bill. You know, my 15-year-old comes in the room and he's watching me pay the electric bill, and it's $700 a month for my household for an electric bill. And he says, well, Dad, that's not bad when you think about it. You've got 4 servers running in the basement that are equal to what, I mean, you could run Toby Hospital on the computers you've got running. You've got 6 TVs in the house. You've got 3 families living here. That's pretty reasonable. So the same kid turned 21 and says, I should contribute to this household. What can I do? And I said, take over the electric bill. Here it is. He says, this is outrageous. So you gotta, you know, be prepared.
Well, I mean,
If you're Bitcoin mining, it would be okay.
I mean, Dan, go ahead.
I just had one question for you, Tricia, and we've kind of nibbled at the edges of it, but in talking to all these people, did you get a good sense of what they do use as their best source of information? Is it?
Oh, I have a bigger
Facebook?
presentation than this to give you
Yeah, so
on that.
we'll-
It's a whole different piece.
Particularly if we're.
Yeah, that'll be the next place. We'll probably take a week off from this to go through
Probably
this and
take
digest it. And
Probably take
we'll take as much
2.5
time as you need to
weeks
recover
for me to
from.
put it together. Well, because doing this type of work it eats a lot of time. You have to go through your notes or your videos and make sure what you hear is exactly what was said. You
Yeah.
can't bias it. And so our step is you take the individual or individuals, you write down everything they said. And then you have to break it and you start to look at, well, how does this stuff group? You know, even when I started putting this data together, until I really looked at it, I didn't realize what our different categories were going to be. I mean, I had an idea about some of them, but not all of them, nor how they all fit together. So that's going to happen on the communication side, and we actually have more data there than we have for this.
Yeah, I can understand that, because this was tailored to a narrow area. I mean, regardless of the divergence of
Yeah.
opinion and priorities, it's still just this little hunk of Wareham that you're taking a look at, where the communication thing is how do you communicate with everybody or try to reach as many as you can, so that's much wider.
Yeah, but I will tell you, I don't have the exact figures on how many people here responded to it yet. What I will tell you is there were a substantial number of people who said, I need to know two things. Weekly, I need to know what's happening. Proactive, active, reactive. Whether that's taking the beacon and making that larger, or looking at a portion of one of the different newspapers to put it in. And the other thing I really want is I want a 4-week rolling calendar available to me of everything that's town-oriented and social-oriented. And I want it 3 weeks out ahead of time so I know when I can do something and be included in something versus reading after the fact that it happened or stumbling across it. So there's a number of things in communications that have been requested, but that's a big, strong highway.
It's kind of funny, you know, the ease of communication that's come along with the internet and computers and all this, that, and the other thing, and social media and so on and so forth. I think it has made people, and I'm probably equally guilty, well, how the hell did I not hear about this? Why didn't they tell me? Because I think we now think we don't have to go looking for it. It should be handed to us.
Well, sometimes they don't know what they're supposed to look for.
Yeah,
also.
yeah, I'm sure that's an
Well,
issue
there's
too.
that, and there's also the fact that there's so much data being jammed down your throat, you have to filter out what's real and what's not as well. And that, the communication is good, but there's danger in it as well.
And I
Yeah.
know I'm stepping a little bit off this project, but I will tell you, one of the young citizens, mid-20s, that I interviewed, person's got a very professional job, engineer type, very, very knowledgeable. And when I asked him, how do we reach you? He said, you need to put a bulletin board up on Route 28. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I don't get a chance to read Instagram. I don't even get a chance to look at my email. I drive down that street every day. So does 3/4 of the people driving down that street are going back and forth to work. You need a bulletin board on the street. I mean,
Go get us another
know.
sign, Derek.
Right.
I mean, so the answers are all over the place.
Yeah.
And capture me for the 0.5 seconds as I drive by.
Yeah.
Again, like Father used to say, I know what the problems are, don't bring me problems, bring me solutions.
Yeah.
Well, he gave us a solution, and I sat and laughed.
Yeah, well, it's a solution for him, but it may not
I
be
think for other people.
21,000 other people.
Yeah, and we're going to
Put
find,
it down Main Street, right in Pizzoli Square, and then, you know, no.
There's no more potbelly stove at the country store.
No.
no,
That's the ideal. What everybody's looking for
yeah,
is the old timers sitting around the potbelly stove talking about what's going on in the village. But it's it take a damn big stove in a big country store to get 22,000 people all to hear the same story.
23,000. 23,000.
23,000, and I can remember in kindergarten, they sat us in a circle and we had to whisper. And when it came back, the guy that said he was gonna put a green elephant in an orange car was over here getting Domino's pizza with pineapple on it. The story changes.
Yeah. Through the retelling, yeah, exactly. Because everybody puts their own gloss on it.
Yeah, so it's communications, and I think I mentioned to you, for what it's worth, from the communications side, the town of Randolph does a hell of a job.
I think I do have that in your notes.
I get, because I have a building in the town of Randolph, it happens to be the biggest building in the town of Randolph, it's, and they think that I'm a citizen there, they think I live there, and I get these, and I'll get a text message, I'll get a voicemail if I don't answer the phone, which I don't, unless it's in my Outlook. And I'll get an email. I'll get 3 identical messages within 30 seconds of each other. And, expect problems with the water because we're changing a pump at the water station. that comes by text, then it comes by voicemail, then it comes by email. And then the next day I get, COVID is up, blah, 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 beep. It's almost annoying, but it's so informative, I don't even live in Randolph and I don't shut it off.
And Jim, that gets back to the point about us as a town needing to decide how we have communication information on all the different
Some
people.
people like text, some people like email,
But I mean, we have to have-
some people like voicemail, and some people like
We
billboards on
have to,
Henry Highway.
we have to have the database of reach out. But anyways, that's
So
for the next
yesterday-
conversation.
I'm sorry, yesterday we had, there's approximately, a couple hundred people that have not renewed the trash from the transfer station. So we, you send out an email, sent out a robocall as well. The calls today, and it's actually it would be from an older demographic, it seems to be. How dare you send a threatening call out to us, and it was informative, it was threatening in their perception, because we reached out via phone.
Actually, I got one of those.
Yes.
And I did feel threatened.
Really?
And part of what was wrong with the message is they said you have to pay it by such and such a date or it will be turned off. And we'll just dump barrels in front of your yard. Now, the problem with it is it went so fast I couldn't hear the date, but the other problem is I have my sticker and I paid for it in the beginning of January. And I still got the message.
Okay, so.
So,
Did you send it out at 5 AM like that one that went out that
No,
one
when
time?
about-
Ticked off everybody, okay,
I
at least you
didn't do
didn't do
that.
that.
it went out about 6 o'clock.
There's a couple hundred on them, so they're like, okay, so let's try and figure out, because Patty's been trying to contact them individually.
Well, I went down there this morning.
Yep.
There were 1,400 sent out. And she just said, I can't check every one. I didn't realize. And I said, it's one thing, but don't threaten me and then tell me there's a date when you're gonna dump barrels on me. And don't say it twice so I can even remember the date. And guess what? I wasn't supposed to be on that list. So of the 1,400, how many are real? Which is why I think you're getting a bunch of calls.
1,400 out of how many, 10,000 households?
We
All
have
I'm
about
s-
7,000 in the trash program, 6,000?
Well, there's 8,200 eligible.
8,200, so it's 14, so that's what, 10%? 12%?
12%. But the
You know,
point is,
getting better.
how many of them weren't real? The question is how
Yeah,
many
so
weren't real?
if you take the phony ones out, and I'm sure they know that you weren't real now,
Well, they do, they do.
so now it's only 1,399.
Anyway, that's another subject. You just happened to bring up the wrong thing, Derek.
No, that's perfect,
That's
because
like-
it's, well, we technically have a PIO, Public Information Officer, for getting some of these things out. But when you're trying to do things, it's, we don't have a script form. And I think sometimes, if you know Amber over there, she's certainly not a threatening person. They're just trying to describe, hey folks, because the trash bills are going out. So what's gonna happen? You're going to be billed for trash. Oh, well, I thought I needed to do this beforehand. All right, now we have to abate them. Now at the selectmen's meeting, we have selectmen yelling at us, why the hell are we doing all these abatements? It's
Well, one in
of those
particular.
things.
So we're back into communication.
Yeah, so
But
it's,
it's complicated by the fact that there are 3 municipalities in Wareham. There's the town of, there's the Onset Water and Fire, and there's the Wareham Water and Fire. So you could have brown water, and we know nothing about it.
So I'm really looking forward to the communication part of this project.
Yeah, so we'll chop that off right now.
Make sure, let me just comment, make sure it's one way, because if you're gonna let 23,000 people respond via the same system,
hey,
it's gonna be DOS within 24 hours.
it's taking longer, I'll take off now.
Denial of service. You overburden the system and.
Anyway, folks, I'll get back.
After
Great
Tricia
job.
just beat
Yeah, we'll,
No problem, Derek.
I've got people that gotta run. What I'm gonna do, just on the second item, is I'm gonna ask each of you, the members, Tricia, because we're not gonna be voting on citizen advisory thing, but we need to start thinking about names for the next meeting, please come up with 5 names. So, 5 from you, 5 from you, 5 from me, 5 from him, 5 from you. And that way, send them directly to me. 5 names of people you would like to, you think would be candidates to serve on the Citizens Advisory Committee for your urban renewal plan. And so listen up. What I'd like you to do is send the names to me on the town email, and I'll compile them, and we'll come in at the next meeting, we'll just go through the roster names and that.
Could you text it, call me an email with this? So I can penetrate, please?
Yeah, at 5 a.m., okay?